listeners to the Mindful Living podcast, where we explore simple practices, soulful wisdom, and real life stories that help us live with more intention, presence, and joy. Now, today we are coloring outside the lines in the best way possible. My guest is the incredibly gifted Jodi Rose Gonzales, a visual artist, art therapist, author, and mindfulness coach whose life's work is devoted to helping people transform emotional stress into empowered self expression. Through her signature art based mindfulness technique, a method, she supports individuals in accessing insight, healing anxiety, and unlocking creativity as a tool for self-care. And what I believe what makes Jodi's story so inspiring for me, and I'm very confident for you as well, listeners, is that her journey isn't just academic. It is deeply, deeply personal. From award-winning environmental sculptor to TEDx speaker, from living with chronic stress and anxiety to founding the I Rose Studio, her work reminds us that healing can be expressive, it can be playful and powerful as well. So, with that, let's begin. And Jodi, welcome to the show. And it is such an honor to have you with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for that very beautiful introduction. That's very meaningful to me. I appreciate that. And to your listeners, hello. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Jodi, for your kind words. And I mean, I'll be very honest. I'm really so drawn to your story because how you turned a successful but stressful art career. I mean, there are many stereotypes around that art career into a mission for emotional wellness, which is really, really unique in its own way. So, what was that turning point, that pivotal moment for you when you knew it was time to shift inward and start using creativity as a healing tool?
I think that there were several calls into the hero's journey. I can think of two or three throughout my life, but I think more recently and more pertaining to art-based mindfulness as I currently have developed it and shared it, evolved from a medical crisis in about 2014, 2015. And at that
Mhm.
point, in terms of my art career and my connection to my creative self, I was quite honestly off the path. I was working in a job that I loved, but it was not a creative field. I had worked as an art therapist for years, but this happened to be in a World War II museum, so it had nothing to do with art therapy. And I was definitely experiencing disconnect from myself, from my creative self, and then depression. And now looking back, anxiety as a result of that, feeling misaligned. But then this health crisis intervened, and it really was a blessing because it was the catalyst for leaning back into my practices. So really getting into yoga to help manage the anxiety and stress, getting back to my creative practices, using the insight and wisdom that I knew as an art therapist to at once use creative practices to manage the fear about pending procedures, but also to just gain insight and to process my emotions. There was grief there. There was, looking at the unknown, at the other side of, pretty major surgery. Um, just identity issues around a diagnosis. So these things which were frightening and I think can often be perceived as obstacles, really were
Mhm.
opportunities for me. And so I really took a unique blend of Western science and the discipline of art therapy with Eastern traditions of mind-body connection, mindfulness, and yoga philosophy. And I created a fusion into a really unique practice that I continue to develop and share with others, and that is my passion, today, and that's what I continue to do to this day.
That's so beautiful and inspiring, Jodi. I mean, there's a confluence here of Western medicine, art therapy, and then Eastern medicine as well. Mindfulness. I mean, so many uh, things interplaying here. So,
Mhm.
I mean, how exactly did you start with this? I mean, because it can be really kind of intimidating.
Mhm.
Maybe. I mean, I would love to know that.
Sure. I'm thinking of several entry points to answering the question. And I feel like it might be helpful to just provide some examples, um, and, to talk about both ends, the Eastern and the Western points of view, and what that means specifically to creativity. This is very heavily intellectual, but when I give examples of how simple the processes are, people usually go, "Oh," like there's this aha moment. It really just offers us permission to do things that, as creatives, that intuitively we know are beneficial, but maybe, we don't have it validated enough to like really lean into it as legitimate coping skills or legitimate strategies for wellness. So, moving from the Eastern tradition, I really love working through the idea of non dualism. In other words, that the mind and body are not separate. And yoga has a wonderful model of the mind body anatomy called the koshas. And
Mhm.
so I was able, so the koshas, there's like your physical body, um, there's your systems body, which includes the nervous system, there's your emotional body, there's the insight body, which is, your intellect, your true self, wisdom, and it goes on. But for purposes of our conversation, I realized that you can use creative practices to work with the physical um, and the system's bodies to basically call up the nervous system's rest and digest. So when we're feeling stressed and anxious, we are somewhat in fight or flight, like the sympathetic nervous system is activated. So we can use creative practices to to create balance there, which results in feelings of calmness or ease. And so, some specific strategies for doing that, it would be using processes that are rhythmic, such as knitting, using knitting or crocheting, where you're like repeating a movement over and over. I think for those of us listeners who knit or crochet, they would all say, well, yes, we do that for relaxation. It has this repetitive, meditative component. Also, materials that are soft. So, in this case, yarn, the tactile quality of softness. Um, Even doing techniques such as like breathing and making mark making. So, like inhaling and having a large sheet of paper, extending the arm and just making a mark with oil pastel or marker, and then exhaling, drawing the line back towards you. And just doing this abstract piece of making marks with the breath, getting into the breath and getting into the body. And even doing that with both hands. So, creative practices that involve both sides of the body can definitely um, call up that rest and digest. There is, from the Western side, quite a lot of research that shows that doing these restorative types of creative practices lowers the heart and breath rate, lowers the production of the stress hormone cortisol, and can actually even shift brainwave patterns into those similar as seen as monks doing in meditation. Um, so in my examples, the activity of knitting or crochet, that's very common. Simply making marks using the breath and, big movements, anyone can do that. And you can see that we're not even looking towards a finished object, a perfect object, an object that has any like meaning or context behind it. It's simply creativity for the sake of doing and for really getting into the bodies, because when we can calm the body, and then that quiets the mind. And when you can calm the body and mind when you're anxious, that's when we can start to really focus on insight and self-awareness and the witness consciousness end of mindfulness. Um, that's maybe a long-winded. There's probably more in answer to your question, but maybe let's pause there. What questions or what reflections does that call up for you as I share that? Because that might be a surprising answer.
Yeah, I know, I know, but I I I believe in this, and because I may not be doing it right now, but and the emotions, the feelings could be different for different people. But
Mhm.
when I see someone else drawing, of course, online on social media and everything, and when I did that myself, it was kind of I mean, I guess I did that a year back. I don't even remember. Okay. And those were, kind of a bit tougher times for me personally.
Mhm.
Um, it kind of gave me that feeling of nostalgia, that comfortness of childhood.
Mm.
And it kind of made me feel relaxing because before drawing or just living through those strokes, seeing those colors coming up, visualizing it, before that I was kind of into the feeling of being lonely, or you know nobody's there to listen to me or hear me. But that kind of helped me calm down a bit, and kind of help me relive those childhood moments when I was so much fascinated with colors. But
Mm.
when we talk about art or something, I guess the first question that will come up in people's minds, that I cannot draw, and even if I'm drawing something, even if it's abstract, it will not look good to me. So it's not going to heal me or make me feel better. So why how will it work for me? I think that's quite a common question that will come up. So what's your opinion on this?
Well, absolutely, and that's a great question, and I have probably 3 to 6 answers to that. But first, I'd like to respond both in answer to that question, but you're noting, like, the feeling of play.
Mhm.
That, and feeling going back to that, not necessarily early childhood, but like middle childhood place.
Mm.
And I think that's really important. We do tend to think that art has to be a certain thing and we need to have a certain proficiency specifically with painting or drawing. And then we very much judge ourselves as either creative or not creative. Our society does that. But when you really look at human development across
Mm.
time, across culture, image making, imagination, creative play, it's a very natural part of the developmental process. It is a very natural way that human beings learn how to communicate and um, emote, specifically, like 5 to 10 years old. So I find that for many people, for adults, going into this practice, when we learn to put the inner critic aside or the judgment aside, that connection to playfulness is so healing, that in itself. So even doing things that seem wickedly silly, like finger painting, or just making a mandala with sticks and stones on the beach, just the things that are close to the earth, that involve movement, that have creativity. It does bring up this sense of nostalgia, so that can be extremely healing if one needs to heal the inner child, and it's incredibly refreshing for those of us that tend to take things too seriously or who suffer from perfectionism. I recently taught a retreat here locally, and I invited people to consider playfulness and the art prompt that I had provided, and it was like everyone's eyes just got wide and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do. And I had all these materials laid out. So, we had these wonderful conversations just to free people up. Like, that's how in our heads and how task oriented we are. Um, so giving oneself permission to be playful, I think, is a huge part of this. And that reminder that creativity is our birthright. It is part of our developmental process. Um, and that when we get playful, when
Mhm.
we start to use our imagination, especially if we're talking on a more clinical end, in trauma recovery, um, imagination and hope are a huge part of healing. Like, especially if you've experienced trauma, there has to be an image of something on the other side, that healing is possible. And creative play can absolutely start to create that vision. Imagination in any form reminds us that there's another world, and that can be the feather that tilts the scale for many on a healing journey. But getting back to, for the person who thinks they're not creative, um,
Mhm.
I hear that, and then the person can cook this amazing meal and lay out the most gorgeous table. I think we just have to really broaden, like, what is creativity? And on the mindfulness aspect, like, where did the idea that one is not creative come from? Was it from a teacher who complimented someone else in class on their artwork more than yours? Was it a parent who put you down? Like, oftentimes there's a little bit of a creative trauma in there, and if we can be mindful as to, like, where that self-talk comes from, that's hugely helpful. Now, like all things in life, creativity is not for everyone, and so there may be listeners who they wouldn't even tune into this episode if they but I think there are a lot of people who are creatively curious and who just feel this, like, just like a little tap on their shoulder to dabble, and it's like, so what is that mindset piece that's telling you that you can't? What is so beautiful about the art-based mindfulness practice is that you don't need proficiency in painting and drawing. In fact, I make these elaborate gowns out of things found in nature, and I do these large scale landscape, site specific pieces. I don't draw or paint very well. I have no training in painting whatsoever. And I like to share that because it does, I think, model that you can still be visually emotive, visually creative. One of my favorite techniques that I love to share, well, two of them, and they both involve nature. Living art journal is simply collecting materials on a mindful walk, collecting a few things from nature, and writing a haiku in response, and really reflecting, like, what do these materials in their texture and their scent, and their do they call up memories, that sort of thing. And then even just taking a little picture of it, returning it to the earth and doing poetry, or using flower petals to create a mandala. Um, these don't take technical proficiency, but to interact with materials, to be in the body, and to play creatively in a very humble way can just really offer powerful experiences for people.
Wow. Wow. And I loved this, word you mentioned, visually emotive.
Mhm.
Visually, such a beautiful word, beautiful expression. And also, as you mentioned about, sometimes past trauma can hold us back to be creatively expressive. Have you come across any kind of gender stereotypes? Because sometimes I'm not sure globally, but socially, we say that okay, maybe music or art or dance is not meant for boys; it's meant for girls, something like that. Maybe as a man, as a boy, I am. I really love drawing. I really love dancing. I really love singing or playing. But that kind of trauma from my childhood, telling, maybe it's teacher or a parent or anyone telling me that no, you're not supposed to do that. It looks like very soft on you. I mean, do you
Mm.
come across such kind of stereotypes as well?
Um, I would say I have not, happily.
Okay.
Although that said, in just putting my work out there in the world,
Mhm.
those that seem to resonate with it are identify as female. Um, and possibly because it is a more, um, I think, feminine, intuitive
Mm.
sort of
Yeah.
approach to creativity. I think
Mhm.
people who identify as male, that come to the practice, they've either done at least who have approached me, have either done their own self-work, so they're very comfortable in exploring their emotional or spiritual worlds, or they already identify as creatives, as working artists, and they're very curious about the tools that I have for, um, helping them move through creative block and programmed or project development, things like that, which are much, more of a structured outcome, than the self-discovery work. Um, so I think it's notable that, art-based mindfulness can be used for things like business planning and project planning, um, and leadership development, things like that, absolutely. I tend to talk about it mostly in terms of personal growth, but, I definitely love to apply it in business as well.
And absolutely, yes, yes. I'm really sure it can be beautifully and practically applied in the business settings as well. Great.
Absolutely. In fact, I've done traditional business plans, but the most recently when I updated my business plan, I used all art-based mindfulness processes. And it was wonderful because taking a step back, when we work with images or with creative processes, it's more of a midbrain activity. And so like the images and the things that come forward are oftentimes more intuitive and symbolic. And we can work with that. We work with that, with the images, with the art products, using journaling and all different types of techniques. When we're doing a traditional business plan or, trying to work on business strategy, we're like in our front brain. The words that come to mind are like front brain, executive functioning, ego, um, shoulds, uh, just things like that are very, I guess, in my mind, dry. Um, and we tend to get in the way of ourselves, but when we start to work with creative processes and images, we have the opportunity to tap into ideas that aren't fully formed yet, or solutions that maybe our thinking mind would easily say, "That's too simplistic, that won't work." So it offers us a really interesting broader perspective for approaching business type problems. And I found it to really, be an enriching experience, and it's fun, it is a creative business, like, using creative processes to redefine the direction of my business was just a very natural language, and then I have this, like and it's hanging in my studio where I work with clients. It's just this wonderful reminder of my why, like, right there on the wall, um, but in a abstract art sort of form. So, yeah, and like I said, it's fun, and it totally, um, offers depth and breadth to an otherwise very brainiac-y process.
Yeah, yeah.
Brainiac-y is not a word, so I'm glad that you laughed there.
Lovely, lovely. Oh, I can make so many pop culture references and making words. So definitely. Anyway, so Jodi, thank you so much. And before we wrap up, of course, if our listeners would like to take a look at your work, connect with you to get access to the beautiful work you're doing out there in art-based mindfulness, what's the best way to do that?
Well, the hub would be jodirosestudio.com. When you go there, there will be a pop-up for my newsletter called Offerings, and Offerings is a weekly newsletter that, provides information about my weekly podcast, the various themes on that, but then also, it does offer direction into ways to get started with the practice. For example, and you'll find this on my website as well. I have a free online community that offers weekly art prompts, affirmations, and journal prompts for those people that like are listening to me today going, I want to get started. Give me more, like, that would be the structured way to start, would be joining the iRose Society from the website. For those that want to hear more about, like, case studies and different types of life situations that can be addressed and the outcomes from this practice, then exploring the podcast, would be, a great way to do that. And then, so jodirosestudio.com and exploring that. Um, and then, on Facebook and Instagram, my handle is jodirose.studio, so there's always information there as well. I have no shortage of free resources, so, just visit my homepage and have fun and reach out to me with questions. I am actually very open, very responsive to, um, questions, comments. I share resources when I can and however much that I can. So I'm very much interactive with people as they contact me.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'll make sure to have all the links and the show notes in there, Jody. And thank you so much, first of all, for sharing your wisdom and reminding us that healing doesn't have to be always like rigid or clinical. It can be really colorful, playful, imperfect, maybe, but deeply human. Thank you so much.
Beautifully said, Sana. Thank you as well.
Oh, to all of our beautiful listeners out there, if you are feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or disconnected, maybe it's time to pick up a pen or a paintbrush or even just a blank page. Because your healing doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be linear. It just needs to be yours. So until next time, stay mindful, stay creative, and as Jody beautifully reminds us, you can rise. Thank you.